A Steadicam sweeps down a pitch-black corridor. Blood-red letters. The chamber has been opened. Explode across the wall. The scratching of a quill screeches like metal on bone. From an overhead view, a basilisk shadow rips through pipework like a subterranean tidal wave. The frame snaps into first person, we're the prey. Harry grips the sword of Gryffindor, face lit by cold gold. Alone, he confronts the lingering echo of Tom Riddle. Fawkes dives, a single tear striking the blade. Time suspends itself. 3 spliced images, 3 incantations. Fear, blood, choice. They don't just foreshadow Hogwarts' darkest night, they map the unspoken vaults inside every viewer. The fairy tale glaze of year, one darkens fast. As term begins, Hogwarts is rocked by petrifications targeting Muggleborns. The fabled Chamber of Secrets, built to purify the school, is open again. Harry is hailed as savior, yet suspected as culprit. Between claustrophobic tunnels and the harsher labyrinth of gossip, he must unmask the air, rescue his friends, and confront the unnerving riddle. Is his own lineage tied to the darkness he fights? No further spoilers. The key is in your pocket, but the door stays shut. This underrated sequel is really a warning letter about modern identity anxiety. Director Chris Columbus drapes the frame in deeper shadows, projecting blood purity dogma, mass panic, and institutional hush onto the wizarding world. Chamber isn't recycling spectacle. It's a systemic stress test. When structures fracture, can choice still rewrite birthright? For years, a strange question survived in production memos. Where did the cut basilisk hatchling end up? It's not a throwaway gag. It's the invisible thread of the film. Who decides to pass fear down the lineage? In the chapters ahead, we'll deconstruct shots, symbols, and historical echoes to trace that missing serpent through the maze of creation, only to find the answer is uncomfortably close to home. Chris Columbus once joked that he signed up for the second Harry Potter film the same way a skydiver steps out of the plane. Nervous grin first, baby blue parachute second. He'd already nailed the bright, storybook tone of the first movie, but the sequel's script dropped a basilisk into the basement and asked kids to wrestle with blood purity politics. Columbus dug up his own childhood fears, Catholic school hallways at night, the metallic smell of boiler rooms, and told production designer Stuart Craig, Hogwarts has to feel older than its students this time. Craig responded by staining the stone, sets an extra 5 shades darker, and filling the Great Hall's ceiling with scudding storm clouds that never made it onto the call sheet, but changed the actors' body language the moment they walked in. Casting almost tipped everything. Robin Williams campaigned hard to play Lockhart, but Warner Brothers. British-only Rule 1 out and Kenneth Branagh signed on, adding a Shakespearean swagger Columbus hadn't dared hope for. Richard Harris returned as Dumbledore, frail, brilliant, and, as we later learned, secretly terminally ill. Columbus let the camera linger on him longer than the script demanded. He'd sensed it might be Harris's last performance and wanted the gravitas baked into the negative. Meanwhile, Toby Jones recorded Dobby's lines in a London sound booth the size of a broom closet, timing each squeak so the tennis ball stand-in on set would hit the right emotional beats. When the director played Jones's scratch track back to the crew, several of the grips teared up. An animatronic that on a stick had suddenly grown a pulse. Budget spreadsheets looked less magical. The studio expected the same $80-something million as the first film, but between the full-scale Whomping Willow rig, a mile of PVC pipe dressed as sewers, and ILM's new water sim software for the Basilisk's reflective scales, the bottom line ballooned past $100 million. Warner executives ordered cuts. A whole subplot, nearly headless Nick's death day party, was filmed under flickering candelabras, then quietly stripped out in post to save pacing minutes and VFX dollars. Columbus fought to keep Moaning Myrtle's bathroom duel intact. He argued that the cracked Victorian tiles and Myrtle's waterlogged rage were the story's emotional pressure valve. He won, but barely. On set, the vibe was a balancing act between child actor energy and horror movie logistics. For the flying car sequence, a battered Ford Anglia was slung beneath a helicopter and buzzed over Scotland. Local farmers phoned in UFO sightings for days. The Basilisk, built as a 40-foot hydraulic puppet, shredded its own latex skin every third rehearsal, sending the creature shop into overnight patch jobs that smelled like a tire fire at dawn. Columbus shot extra coverage of the sword-fighting finale when he noticed Daniel Radcliffe switching from fear to defiance in a single take, proof the kid was growing up just as fast as the stakes. Early drafts ended with Lockhart's memory charm working. Harry and Ron dragged a blank-eyed professor back to the castle, leaving the audience unsure if he'd ever recover. Test screenings found that beat too bleak, so Steve Kaloves rewrote the coda to land the joke harder, but Columbus kept a few frames of Brannow's empty stare buried in the optical printer. He claimed that sliver of unease mattered because nothing in this world, not even a punchline, comes without a cost. By the time principal photography wrapped, the crew had burned through 22,000 candles, 8 animatronic spiders, and enough green paint to make the Faculty of Design at Oxford gasp. Columbus looked at the edit bay and realized he hadn't just made a children's adventure. He'd documented the moment Hogwarts lost its innocence. And he'd done it under studio notes that begged him to keep it fun. The tension between those two poles, warmth and dread, became the movie's heartbeat. It still throbs if you lean in close enough to hear it. The movie's story engine hums like a 3-tier clock. The present-day school year clicks forward 1 gear at a time. The diary yanks us 50 years backward, and a third, silent wheel, the venomous future, keeps threatening to jump the track. Columbus and editor Peter Honus cut between those gears with a magician's misdirection, hiding Ginny's possession in plain sight by making every flash of her red hair pass like a random background detail. When the script does flip open the diary, it doesn't fade to sepia or change aspect ratio the way fantasy often signals a flashback. Instead, the camera dives straight through the paper, a literal plunge from one timeline into another. The psychological trick is that viewers never feel they've left the now, so when past and present collide in the chamber, it lands like 2 elevator cars ramming each other in the same shaft. Within that architecture, Columbus plays cat and mouse with point of view. Harry is on screen for roughly 70% of the runtime, but Columbus keeps slipping the camera to shoulder height behind someone else, Filch limping up the stairs, Hermione flipping a library page, even Mrs. Norris winding around a mop bucket, so the audience processes new evidence the moment Harry does, yet through another character's bodily anxiety. It's a cheap noir tactic dressed up in wizard robes, and it lets the film bind us to Harry's ignorance while planting clues our peripheral vision can't quite shake. Parallel lines run even tighter under the surface. Line A is Harry's non-stop hero chase. Line B is Ginny's secret horror story, unfolding off-screen, except for a diary ink blot here, a guilty glance there. Line C, which critics sometimes overlook, is the chain of adult alibis. Dumbledore's magic leaves traces, McGonagall's rule-bound calm, Lockhart's narcissistic bluster. Honus cuts those 3 threads like interlacing staves of sheet music, letting one crescendo while the others drop to pianissimo. The pattern creates an emotional Doppler effect. As Harry's danger escalates, the adult world's reassurance sounds fainter, which is precisely how adolescence feels when you start realizing the grown-ups don't have a plan. That contrapuntal rhythm breaks from Columbus's usual toolbox. In Home Alone, he lets slapstick sequences run in elastic real time. In The Sorcerer's Stone, he dunked us in episodic wonder stops, Diagon Alley, the moving staircases, Christmas in the Great Hall, each framed like a postcard. Chamber tightens the screws by cross-cutting on tension instead of spectacle. Where the first film brightened each set piece with applause line lighting, the sequel crash zooms into dread, then cuts away just before it peaks, teaching the viewer to expect pain on the next inhale. That shift foreshadows Columbus stepping back after this installment. The director famous for cozy chaos finally proves he can play in the dark and then elects to quit while that edge is sharp. Roger Pratt's lens work pushes the evolution further. His Resume, Brazil, 12 Monkeys is a crash course in paranoid dream logic. Pratt trades John Seale's lush golds for bruised greens and tarnished bronzes, tonally closer to spider eyes than candlelight. He also loves long staccato dolly moves, short bursts that start flat, punch past a foreground object, and reframe the subject dead center, like a visual jump scare without the sound cue. That signature shot pops up when Harry first hears the basilisk in walls. The camera rockets behind a candelabrum and lands on his face as though the whisper physically shoved us. Columbus cited that move as a spine tap, the opposite of the gentle push-ins Seale used for wonder. It's technical code for eyes forward, trouble's coming. Academic takes on these choices break into 2 camps. One argues the film sands down Rowling's class allegory by resolving everything inside a hero quest scaffold. Blood purity is branded as villainous but not systemic, so viewers can leave feeling the problem was just one snake, one diary, one bad aristocrat. The opposing camp claims the diary conceit radicalizes the narrative. If prejudice can literally write itself into a blank mind, then the threat isn't a monster but a meme, and defeating Salazar's lizard doesn't cure the culture. That split shows up in undergraduate papers, where reviewers either praise the film's courage in addressing racialized language for a PG audience or blame it for pulling its punch by restoring status quo comforts once the Basilisk is dead. Similar whiplash surrounds the Death Day party deletion. Some scholars lament the loss of ghost social politics, a chance to underline how invisible communities create their own traditions when the living won't listen. Others defend the cut as an act of cold-blooded pacing. The tension curve would have flatlined if we spent 8 minutes on spectral fruitcakes while kids were turning to stone in the hallway. Even the Lockhart denouement sparks dispute. One school of thought says stripping him of memory is poetic justice. Another points out that erasing a liar's lies also erases the evidence of his harm, letting the institution dodge public accountability. Branagh plays the final beats with a dazed grin ambiguous enough that both readings can stand. Columbus himself folds the debate into formal mechanics. He shoots the climactic diary stabbing in a tight 50mm that blurs the basilisk carcass into abstract swirls of green and gold, isolating the violent act from the corpse of ideology it's meant to destroy. Some analysts treat that aesthetic distance as moral hesitation. The camera refuses to wallow in gore. Others read it as artistic responsibility. Hatred may be huge and grotesque, but the decisive blow often looks small and almost accidental, the way real social change arrives in a whisper rather than a bang. Comparisons to later directors sharpen the point. Alfonso Cuarón, who picks up the baton in Prisoner of Azkaban, unspools time with long, liquid takes, treating Hogwarts like a living artery instead of a medieval diorama. His flowy style underscores adolescent fluidity, identity not yet congealed. Columbus's final stamp, in contrast, is the hard cut, shot-reverse shot that slams cause and effect together like a witness statement. Where Cuarón paints mood, Columbus stamps evidence. One cares about atmosphere, the other about filing charges. Chamber of Secrets, therefore, stands as the franchise's courtroom drama, a procedural locked in kids' fantasy drag. What keeps that prosecutorial vibe from turning didactic is the film's sarcastic reflex. Every time Lockhart bloats to full peacock mode, Columbus times a cutaway to Hermione's eye roll, like a rimshot. That editorial slapstick breaks tension but also sharpens the blade. We laugh at the fraud, then flinch when his vanity almost gets the heroes killed underground. Critics still wrestle with whether that tonal flip-flop undercuts or enhances the message. Some assert the humor cushions the truth too much, like sugar coating on a bitter pill. Others claim it mirrors how real prejudice often hides behind charming smiles, waiting for the chance to slip in a dagger. The deepest fissure among scholars centers on Dobby's emancipation. One faction hails the sock trick as children's cinema sneaking labor rights politics into multiplex popcorn. Another sees it as liberal wish fulfillment that reduces systemic servitude to a cute gag, freedom as a sock, not collective bargaining. Columbus stages the moment in a corridor lit like late afternoon grace, lens flare sparking off Lucius's hair, but then tilts the camera in a Dutch angle so the triumph feels a bit crooked. That subtle skew keeps the victory provisional, a drafted treaty rather than a final armistice. By the time end credits roll, Chamber of Secrets has woven a tripod narrative, a color-coded panic attack, and an academic tug-of-war into a film that still sells chocolate frogs in gift shop packaging. Columbus and Pratt show that kids' cinema can boot camp audiences for moral complexity without scaring them out of their seats. They feed you dread in measured microdoses, like vaccine drops, until you build antibodies against lazy storytelling. Whether scholars brand the movie subversive or compromised, its editing rhythms keep pulsing beneath the discourse, a rhythmic reminder that stories are machines for empathy, and empathy, like the Basilisk, always finds a pipe. The Basilisk may be the poster beast, but the engine driving every scream in Chamber of Secrets is history, that thick, sticky residue of other people's decisions that never quite washes off. Salazar Slytherin's bigotry isn't a lightning bolt event, it's policy fossilized into architecture. Look at the way his statue looms over the chamber, Roman emperor scale, chin lifted the way marble Caesars were carved to remind the provinces who paid for the aqueducts. The production team aged the stone so the greens run like copper patina. The idol literally oxidizes before our eyes, a chemical reminder that power, left long enough, rusts into ideology. The statue outlived its maker, and the idea outlived the statue. because prejudice is the most durable building material on Earth. It renovates itself from century to century while pretending to be heritage. Tom Riddle understands that durability better than any adult in the film. His teenage diary voice isn't ranting about bloodlines the way Malfoy does in a bookstore aisle. He sells the idea with charm, curiosity, fake empathy. Riddle is YouTube radicalization 25 years early, packaging supremacy as self-help. When he writes to Ginny, he doesn't lecture. He sympathizes, positions himself as the only person who really listens. That tactic drags the power conversation out of marble halls and into lonely bedrooms, showing how a grand historical poison dilutes itself into something drinkable, like arsenic holed up in peppermint tea. The diary is a metaphor for every soft channel through which bad ideas seep: anonymous message boards, late-night conspiracy streams, even the echo chambers we build out of shame. Ginny's victimhood, then, isn't just a plot device, it's a sociological case study. Watch her body language in the Great Hall scenes. She keeps her elbows tucked, shrinking the space she occupies, a visual apology for existing. The diary gives that insecurity a hand to hold. It says, "You're special because you feel small." The moment she buys in, she starts replicating the same exclusion she fears, attacking Muggle-borns to feel less powerless. The film never says this out loud, but every time Ginny wakes up blank-eyed, it's illustrating how the most violent gatekeepers often begin as the most isolated outsiders. That inversion is the story's hardest punch. Oppression can masquerade as comfort long before it shows its fangs. Harry sits at the center of a different triangle: loyalty to friends, suspicion from peers, and a sickening recognition that he shares abilities, Parseltongue orphan status, resentment of neglect, with the boy who became Voldemort. Columbus shoots Harry's moral crossroads with a handheld wobble rare in this franchise, letting the camera breathe and jitter like a heart under stress. Those frames argue that identity isn't inherited whole cloth. It's drafted every day in micro-decisions. Speak up or stay silent, investigate or accept rumor, offer grace or flex authority. When Harry chooses to risk his own life for Ginny, the script quietly yanks him off the genetic chessboard and puts him on the ethical one. Blood might give you a set of opening moves, but choice decides whether the game ends in checkmate or handshake. The Weasley family broadens that conversation beyond the kids. Arthur's fascination with Muggle gizmos gets played for laughs, rubber ducks, spark plugs, but it also signals a radical hospitality. He's the first adult we meet who tries to understand the other on their terms instead of sorting them into categories. That posture isn't just moral, it's strategic. By embracing difference, Arthur inoculates his children against the seductions that doom Ginny. The production design helps here. His cluttered workshop brims with mismatched color and noise, the antithesis of Malfoy Manor's silk curtain stillness. One space is porous, alive, humming with experiments. The other is polished to the point of sterility. The visual grammar says what the dialogue doesn't. Worldview is home decor. Power hierarchy shows up again in how authority responds to crisis. Hogwarts governance splits into 3 stripes. Dumbledore embodies benign neglect, wise, tolerant, but slow to act. McGonagall is procedure personified, enforcing rules even when the rules can't address the emergency. Lockhart is pure optics, worried only about how the crisis photographs. Columbus frames this trio in literal tears during the staff meeting where Ginny is reported missing. Dumbledore stands on a dais, McGonagall halfway down the steps, Lockhart at ground level fussing with air. That pyramid is a civic satire. Wisdom at the top, bureaucracy in the middle, vanity shouting at the base. The joke would be bleak if it weren't so recognizable. Institutions fail not because no one cares, but because a 3-way tug of reputation, regulation, and risk keeps dragging the rope in circles while the clock runs out. Once the film dives underground, the power analysis turns mythic. Harry must pass through concentric rings of abandonment, plumbing abandoned by architects, tunnels abandoned by students, a chamber abandoned by the founders, to reach Riddle, the abandoned boy. The set layout mirrors a social X-ray. Every layer closer to the monster reveals an earlier civic failure papered over by plaque and memory. Production designer Stuart Craig even inserted Romanesque arches down the final corridor, hinting at an empire that fell so long ago its sins became sewer support beams. The Basilisk is the literalization of all that buried garbage. It doesn't just kill, it weaponizes your own gaze against you, turning curiosity into paralysis. That's what inherited bigotry does. It freezes cultures because no one can look in the eye without turning to stone. Harry's victory carries a price almost everyone misses on first viewing. Phoenix tears can heal flesh, but they don't erase trauma. Watch Radcliffe's body after Fawkes saves him, shoulders still hunched, breath shallow, sword shaking. Columbus holds a long beat on that posture before the triumphant swell of music. It's a subtle argument that surviving hate isn't the same as defeating it. You carry some venom forward. The next generation inherits not just snake fangs, but also scar tissue, and maybe that's the real horror, history's aftertaste in the bloodstream. Back above ground, Lucius Malfoy storms off without punishment. The school cheers, the banners unfurl, Christmas carols ring from the rafters even though it's spring. Some critics read that ending as a cop-out, a cheap reset to protect the franchise's episodic model. But the unresolved aristocrat is, in fact, the script's bleakest truth. Systems rarely collapse in one heroic gesture. They stagger, adapt, swap figureheads. Columbus frames Lucius's exit in a dolly track that pulls away from a castle, snow drifting in slow motion, so the architect of the crisis literally leaves the story's frame. The camera refuses to chase him, implying he's part of a threat larger than one lens can hold. That shot invites the audience to pan left, into real life, and ask, where do men like that go when the credits roll? At ground level, the story still slips in a spark of rebellion, Dobby's liberation. A sock may sound twee, but legally it's a loophole, a hack in the rules that enslave house elves. The moment suggests that systemic rot often breaks at its smallest joints. Freedom sneaks in through clerical errors before it marches in courtrooms. That reading snaps back to Ginny. Her vulnerability cracked the door, but her courage to own her actions afterward seals it shut behind the Basilisk. Personal accountability isn't the finish line of activism, but it's the first step out of the pipe. All these threads, statue politics, diary grooming, institutional gridlock, converge on one thesis: the scariest monster is the past we refuse to exhume. Chamber of Secrets digs up that past, swings it around like a flashlight, and then shoves it back under the floorboards because the series still wants to sell wonder. Yet the dust never fully settles. It hangs in the beam long after the scene cuts. Children notice that particulate even if they can't name it, and maybe that's the point. The film smuggles civic antibodies into an adventure yarn, telling kids that ancestry can be questioned, that tradition can rot, and that sometimes the bravest act is to pry up the tile and see what's hissing underneath. None of this sermon lands unless the story sticks the emotional landing, so Columbus banks everything on quiet gestures. Harry handing the diary to Malfoy like a bored schoolboy, letting the sock slip with calculated nonchalance, Ginny collapsing into her mother's arms in a hug that lasts half a beat too long, Hermione sprinting across the Great Hall to Ron, and then pulling back, embarrassed by feelings she doesn't know how to file. These micro-tremors in the human fabric remind us the macro horrors matter because they bruise individuals. Politics is personal, even at Hogwarts. The last frame shows Fawkes beating out through a high window, feathers scattering like sparks before they vanish in the sky. A phoenix, yes, but also an alarm flare. Renewal will happen, ashes bird flight, but only if someone stares into the rubble long enough to light the pyre. The camera lingers just long enough for viewers to register the double bind. Rebirth demands a funeral. With that, Columbus signs off on his 2-film tenure, leaving behind a gothic cautionary tale wrapped in robes and butterbeer. You can roll credits, but the pipes in the walls will keep rattling, waiting for the next kid who thinks lineage is destiny to pry them open again. Chamber of Secrets hit cinemas in 2002, months after news cycles flooded with terror alerts and DNA mapping breakthroughs, so its talk of bloodlines and hidden threats landed with unnerving precision. Parents saw a cautionary tale about discrimination wearing a children's fantasy mask, while kids picked up a different frequency entirely. The movie licensed them to boo institutional failure out loud. School administrators fielded fresh waves of complaints about hallway slurs because students, newly fluent in the word mud-blood, were testing the boundary between fiction and real-world prejudice. Bookstores answered by shelving anti-racism primers beside the tie-in sticker books, an accidental cultural mashup that perfectly mirrored the film's collision of whimsy and venom. Critics split faster than a sorting hat on deadline. One camp praised the sequel for introducing systemic injustice to a generation hooked on wizard candy. The other slammed it for packaging hate as a monster you can stab with a sword, a feel-good shortcut that leaves real bigotry breathing. That rift mirrors the movie's own audience divide. Younger viewers tended to fixate on the basilisk, the literal eye contact killer, because childhood teaches you to fear the thing with teeth. Adults, having lived through workplace power plays and broadcast demagogues, understood that the true horror was a whisper campaign about pure heritage administered by men in perfect tailoring. The Basilisk is only Act 3 fireworks. Malfoy money is Act 1 oxygen, quietly keeping the fire alive. The fandom itself embodied the story's tensions. Cosplay forums flared over whether dressing as a Slytherin-endorsed elitism or subverted it by turning symbols of oppression into carnival gear. Hashtag sprouted. Hashtag Reclaim the Serpent argued that children shouldn't surrender entire aesthetics to bigots, while hashtag Not My House insisted that irony dissolves when the symbols have real victims. Those arguments, archived in scroll-back comment threads, stand as living footnotes to the film's central question: can you separate lineage from allegiance? The debate's intensity proved the movie had smuggled its thesis into the bloodstream of pop culture, whether or not it solved the riddle on screen. Zoom out to the political climate. In Britain, the Macpherson Report on Institutional Racism was barely 3 years old. In the United States, the Patriot Act had just rewired civil liberties. Audiences were primed to notice when authority figures in the wizarding world invoked safety to justify surveillance or scapegoating. Hogwarts suspends Quidditch and locks students in dormitories, an echo of real lockdown drills rolling out across Western schools. The Ministry Owl delivering an underage magic reprimand to Harry felt like a bureaucratic reflex conditioned to police the symptom while ignoring the cause. Viewers watching with CNN's crawl ticker still in their peripheral vision couldn't help but map the fiction onto nightly headlines. The film captured institutional panic before newspapers coined the phrase security theater. The house elf subplot became its own lightning rod. Labor activists loved that kids were suddenly talking about unpaid domestic servitude. Conservative commentators dismissed the metaphor as political propaganda in wizard drag. Scholastic's discussion guides tried to satisfy both camps with softball questions about freedom and kindness, yet students pushed further, asking why only personal charity, not parliamentary law, freed Dobby. Those uncomfortable inquiries seeped into classroom debates on sweatshops and immigration, proof that narrative allegory can bulldoze civics lessons straight into Monday morning homeroom. Power misuse threads through every adult arc. Dumbledore's genial hands-off leadership reads differently when petrified children stack up under his watch. His faith in student agency edges toward negligence. McGonagall's devotion to procedure rings hollow when the rules themselves turn into rigid cul-de-sacs. Gilderoy Lockhart weaponizes celebrity, peddling narcissism as pedagogy until the very spell meant to erase witnesses ricochets and erases him instead. Columbus shoots Lockhart's final befuddlement with soft backlight, a visual lullaby that almost invites sympathy, then immediately pairs the image with Harry and Ron trudging past collapsed debris he caused, a reminder that charm without competence is collateral damage waiting for a place to happen. Lucius Malfoy's cane offers the starkest object lesson, a snakehead handle doubling as wand sheath, authority fused to violence literally at hand. Jason Isaacs twirls it like a maestro's baton, underscoring how prejudice often performs itself as elegance. When Lucius threatens Harry outside Dumbledore's office, the camera hovers inches from polished wood, capturing fingerprints in the lacquer. That detail breaks the illusion of untouchable aristocracy. Even the cane sweats under pressure. Yet Lucius exits the scene unshackled, an indictment so bold almost slips by unremarked. The system protects the donor class even when the smoking wand is still warm. Ethical gray zones multiply on the hero's side too. Polyjuice infiltration stages identity theft as bravery. Memory charms get floated as convenient cleanup tech. Hermione brews her potion in a bathroom, a liminal space where boundaries blur, mirroring how good intentions can slip across moral lines once urgency supplies momentum. The script forces viewers to ask whether righteous goals excuse dubious means, then refuses a neat answer. That tension anticipates later franchise chapters, but its groundwork is laid here, between the humor of voice-cracked adolescence and the creeping dread of institutional violence. For all its talk of purity, the movie's visceral horror is petrification, not death. Stone victims can be restored, implying that bigotry's damage, while severe, is reversible. Some critics call that a narrative cop-out, others champion it as age-appropriate realism, acknowledge harm, leave room for healing. Columbus visually underscores that compromise by lighting the hospital wing in cathedral whites instead of morgue fluorescence. Hope stays on life support, never unplugged. The moral line is drawn just before the abyss, letting young audiences stare down systemic cruelty without tumbling into nihilism. Cinematography reinforces that boundary. Roger Pratt keeps the basilisk kills off camera or plays them in silhouette, holding gore at a respectful distance while still honoring the fear. Moral horror thrives in implication. Literal entrails might have numbed the message. When the monster finally appears in full, its sheen resembles ancient bronze rather than wet sinew, a design choice that frames the beast as monument, not animal, history's ugly bust come alive. Toppling it is therefore an act of civil demolition, the magical equivalent of dragging a statue off its pedestal. The movie's fairness calculus surfaces most plainly in the Weasley-Malfoy contrast. One family lives in cluttered warmth where second-hand robes stack beside mismatched crockery. The other dwells in marble symmetry, so antiseptic it could double as a banking hall. Columbus never needs a voiceover to explain wealth inequality. The set decorators hang that argument on wallpaper and teacups. When Arthur and Lucius trade blows inside flourish and blots, the scuffle ends with children laughing. An echo of playground justice, but the slow-motion flurry of papers they leave swirling in the air looks less like slapstick debris and more like torn social contracts, drifting until someone older bothers to collect them. After the final trumpet blast, the story invites each viewer to pick a lane, loyalty to inherited symbols or allegiance to chosen values. Columbus urges that decision with a last over-the-shoulder shot of Harry staring down the empty corridor where Lucius walked away. No dialogue, just stone arches receding into shadow, the cinematic equivalent of a blank line waiting for a signature. In that silence, the film stops being a closed text and becomes an open referendum. Whether audiences cast their vote by cheering, cosplaying, or debating footnotes on Reddit, the participation itself proves the spell worked. A children's fantasy provoked civic engagement, a basilisk masquerading as popcorn roared its way into public policy chatter, and the echo still ricochets whenever someone wonders how many generations of prejudice can skip before turning to stone again. Fan energy did not disperse after the credits. It diffused like potion steam into every corner of the internet and the arts. Within months of the DVD release, DIY Parseltongue translators popped up on GeoCities pages, letting users input text and spit back serpentine phonetics, half joke, half cryptographic roleplay. Wizard rock bands sampled those hissed syllables as backing loops. A Boston outfit pressed a whole concept album that layered skate-punk guitar over readings from the diary chapters. TikTok's predecessor, Vine, once clocked 20 million loops on a 6-second gag that cut from a mundane hallway to a cat yowling through a green filter labeled Basilisk POV. The meme worked because everyone instantly understood the mortal peril implied in a bored corridor, proving the film had drilled its symbolism into muscle memory. Academic attention arrived almost as quickly, though in a different register. A sociology conference at the University of Leeds devoted an entire panel to Chamber as a case study in youth-friendly depictions of institutional scapegoating. Papers dissected everything from the economics of unpaid elf labor to the semiotics of bathrooms as liminal threat zones. Scholars in post-colonial studies compared Tom Riddle's diary to missionary tracts, portable texts that overwrite indigenous memory with imperial scripts. None of those readings existed when the book first appeared. They flourished only after the movie's art direction choices, patina on Slytherin statue, catacomb echoes in the sound mix, turned subtext into audio-visual evidence. Further downstream, the story's imagery seeped into grassroots politics. Protest placards during the 2017 Women's March featured Moaning Myrtle's catchphrase, "My life was so unloved," repurposed under drawings of broken bathroom signs, highlighting trans access fights. College unions borrowed Dobby's sock as a mascot for adjunct labor rights, waving laundry lines outside administrative offices with slogans like, "Free the faculty." The wizarding world's moral lessons had jumped canonical boundaries and reskinned real grievances, which is exactly how folklore evolves. A talisman changes owners until it fits a new battle. That cultural churn makes space for side-door viewing and reading experiences that mirror the film's themes without repeating its plot. Anyone intrigued by inherited power structures expressed as Gothic fantasy could chase down Guillermo del Toro's The Devil's Backbone. Set in a Spanish orphanage during the Civil War, it stages haunting as historical aftershock and lets crumbling architecture echo long-buried sins, much like the Chamber's corroded vaults. For a live-wire riff on coded lineage and bodily possession, Jennifer Kent's The Babadook folds a pop-up book monster into parent-child trauma, exposing how fierce stories colonize domestic space. Slightly farther off the blockbuster path lies Babak Anwari's Under the Shadow, an Iranian horror film where a missile inexplicably lodged in an apartment roof becomes both literal and metaphoric invader, turning mother and daughter into unwilling hosts. Riddle's Diary, minus wands, plus geopolitics. And if you want comedy to sugarcoat the critique, Anna Biller's The Love, which dresses vintage Technicolor glamour around lethal essentialism, teasing viewers to question what traditions really demand in exchange for belonging. Books offer parallel wormholes. N.K. Jemison's The 100,000 Kingdoms opens with a young woman summoned to a palace that mythologizes bloodlines, gods imprisoned as living weapons whisper in her ear, a clear cousin to Riddle's manipulative diary. For nonfiction ballast, Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, traces how hierarchical myths seep into law, language, and architecture. The academic footnote Salazar, Slytherin never wrote, but clearly read. If you crave allegorical children's lit that confronts systemic cruelty head-on, try Catherine Addison's The Goblin Emperor. A half-goblin teenager inherits an empire steeped in racial disdain and must decide whether mercy passes for weakness. And for a quick, eerie novella that weaponizes the written word as parasite, read This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal Elmoter and Max Gladstone, where letters between rival agents twist into emotional sabotage, Tom and Ginny scaled to cosmic war. Each of these works shares the Chamber's DNA strand, inheritance as a double-edged wand. Whether that wand writes in ink, carves in marble, or programs a missile, the hand that holds it must choose between preservation and transformation. Fans keep replaying the moment Harry stabs the diary because it literalizes a desire to scratch out corrupted sentences in our own social scripts. But the diary's ashes don't flutter into nothing. They settle as a thin dust on the floor, waiting for the next sweep of history to stir them up. That uncomfortable residue is why the film endures. It never lets us believe the basilisk was the whole problem. The monster was a symptom, the infrastructure was the sickness, and culture, be it rock song, protest banner, or grad school thesis, remains the cure still in clinical trials. The first wave of viewers walked out of the theater punching the air, certain they had just watched good triumph with a clang of sword on Fong. The second wave emerged uneasy, picking at the residue of questions the credits couldn't bleach away. Why did so many adults hesitate? Why did the crowd boo before it cheered? Why did everyone seem relieved to forget the petrified children as soon as they woke up? That immediate split, joy versus unease, is the movie's quietest trick. It teaches the audience to sort itself into camps and then keeps tightening the lens on how each camp talks past the other. Step back and you can watch the sorting continue in real time. Families debating whether the film is scary but wholesome or a gateway to darker conversations. Teachers arguing over whether to screen in class. Fan forums lighting up with threads titled, Is Slytherin actually evil or just misunderstood? When art forces people to declare their comfort level with moral risk, it has already shifted the culture. Columbus positions that shift in the Quidditch stands. Early on, Slytherin fans rattle silver and green noisemakers so loud they drown the announcer. By the final match, they sit oddly subdued, unsure whether to celebrate a win that might be powered by the wrong kind of magic. The camera doesn't linger, but the background paint quietly dries. Collective enthusiasm curdles when the scoreboard success starts smelling like corruption. That visual hint pairs with real-world audience reaction. Merchandise sales for green-trimmed scarves actually dipped after release weekend, then rebounded months later once irony reframed House Pride as playful rebellion. Market data became a barometer for ethical digestion, conscience measured in cashmere stripes. Press junkets offered their own Rorschach test. Daniel Radcliffe and Emma Watson fielded lightweight questions about stunts, while Jason Isaacs faced inquiries about aristocratic cruelty and racial allegory. The differential grilling was an echo of the story's inequality. Children invited to frolic, adults forced to explain the system's shadow. Isaacs gamely pointed out that his cane snakehead is capped with a literal fong, so every time Lucius leans on it, he's pressing venom into the floor, a detail reporters had missed. Suddenly props were indictment, and a lazy question became a civics lesson. That minor viral clip fed online compilations titled Moments the Press Realized HP isn't just kids' stuff, drawing millions of views that summer. The marketing machine inadvertently demonstrated one of the film's theses. Image management can't outrun truth when audiences learn to follow the cracks. Inside the narrative, power misuse spirals outward from Lockhart's classroom like concentric shockwaves. What begins as personal vanity mutates into institutional hazard the instant he volunteers to fix Harry's arm. Columbus blocks the scene, so the camera hovers just left of center, leaving a sliver of empty frame beside Lockhart's wand, space for the viewer's dread to bloom. The spell backfires, bones vanish, and Madame Pomfrey storms in muttering about authorities who play doctor. That line was almost cut for pacing but stayed, a 1-second condemnation that lands harder today when misinformation masquerades as expertise everywhere from social media to state houses. Children absorb the caution by laughing first, then wincing when Harry's rubbery limb flops. Adults flinch in reverse order. The gag is a Trojan horse for skepticism, training all ages to eyeball credentials before extending trust. McGonagall's procedural rigidity forms the movie's ethical middle. Sturdy but brittle. She cancels Quidditch practice with a voice that quivers between duty and regret, then freezes mid-announcement when students beg for updates she can't provide. Pratt lights her face half in torch glow, half in stone-gray shadow, recording the moment bureaucracy saturates its own moral bandwidth. The image pinned itself to classroom smartboards in media literacy units. Instructors freeze-framed it to ask, what do rules protect when they stop protecting people? Students circled her stony half in red digital ink, inventing the phrase, McGonagall threshold, to mean the line where protocol chokes empathy. That grassroots coinage drifted into teacher blogs and eventually into an academic paper on crisis communication, art-seeding terminology long after box office tallies faded. The Basilisk attack patterns broaden the indictment beyond Hogwarts walls. Victims are found near water, reflective glass, camera lenses, surfaces designed for self-examination. The unsubtle metaphor says institutions weaponize our own gaze against us until we're paralyzed by the reflection of rules we never consented to. When Ginny writes blood warnings on the corridor wall, the letters drip like fresh paint rather than sticky gore. Craig insisted on that texture so the threat would read as editorial rather than carnage. It's vandalism as op-ed, an argument that marginalized voices resort to spectacle when formal channels ignore them. The shot resonated with activists who later projected crisis statistics onto government buildings, citing Ginny's graffiti as inspiration in zines that merge Hogwarts fonts with public policy data. Fiction had leaked into protest design, the circle complete. The moral ledger doesn't spare heroes. Polyjuice infiltration raises privacy stakes well before Facebook's algorithm ever made headlines. The trio's experiment turns them into living deep fakes, a concept still sci-fi in 2002, but now painfully tangible. Columbus frames their transformation with a rickety mirror and flares of gaslight, a steampunk harbinger of today's face-swap filters. The film thus anticipates a decade of ethical debate about impersonation technology, long before lawmakers or even technologists notice the slope. By making the audience root for deception to expose deception, the story complicates heroism. Ends and means circle each other like twin serpents, same fong, different targets. Dobby's arc exposes another fracture line, liberation through individual benevolence. A sock tricks the system, but systems don't generally fall for tricks, they redesign the fine print. Fans clocked that loophole immediately and spun entire fan-FIC sagas imagining house elf unions, collective bargaining spells, magical strikes. One viral story depicted Dobby founding the Equal Enchantment Alliance, complete with parchment newsletters. The fact those tales pulled sizable readerships implies the official narrative resolved the injustice too neatly for a portion of the audience. Their creative labor became a shadow sequel, proof that neat endings itch when the worldview they tidy up still feels untidy outside the multiplex. Polarization reaches its apex in the chamber showdown. Harry draws Gryffindor's sword, a royal-looking blade, yet he stands knee-deep in wastewater. Columbus chooses a high-angle shot that miniaturizes the hero, questioning whether a lone champion can indeed outscale systemic rot. When the Basilisk corpse coils around pipes after death, Pratt's lighting reflects red off stagnant water, an ugly, rust-colored bloom that lingers as credits start. Viewers, especially older ones, sense the mess outlive the victory. Fan theorists coin Basilisk rust to label unresolved fallout in subsequent books, a phrase later borrowed by political pundits to describe long-tail backlash after headline victories. Again, the film's iconography broke quarantine, supplying vocabulary for discourse the franchise never scripted. Audience fault lines thickened when DVD extras dropped. Deleted scenes revealed a longer Transfiguration lecture where McGonagall warns, all magic casts a shadow equal to its light. The line feeds the theme of proportional responsibility, but test audiences flagged it as too abstract. Online, those 7 seconds became rally material for viewers who felt the finished cut trimmed moral nuances. Bootleg GIFs looped McGonagall's caution under captions about corporate social responsibility, trending each time a tech scandal broke. The classroom warning that almost vanished proved sticky precisely because it was orphaned, an attic ghost that whispered louder once silenced. Critical backlash against the movie's statue-toppling metaphor intensified in later years when real monuments fell across public squares. Some commentators revisited Slytherin's Titan bust and accused the film of trivializing revolt by reducing it to adolescent swashbuckling. Others argued the very accessibility of that metaphor helped a younger generation visualize why stone idols matter. Both readings find ammo in Columbus's choice to let the statue remain mostly intact. Its gaze breaks, its influence does not. The camera pans but never shows rubble clearance, underscoring how structures rarely crumble according to heroic timelines. That incomplete demolition became the go-to screenshot for think pieces titled, "The Chamber Isn't Empty Just Because the Door is Shut." Even music cues court division. John Williams revisits his soaring motif for flight during the Ford Anglia escape, but re-orchestrates it in minor key for Fawkes's rescue, suggesting liberation can sing in 2 registers, reckless thrill and sacrificial dirge. Concert bands parsing the score noticed and programmed the twin themes back-to-back, inviting audiences to hear triumph mutate into elegy in real time. High school musicians debating those bars unknowingly enacted the movie's lesson. Collective art requires arguing about the same notes until harmony emerges or dissonance reveals truth worth keeping. Through all these cascading resonances, the film never offers a master key. It leaves locks half open, challenges half solved, so you can test your own principles against each puzzle. Columbus's genius is to camouflage the gaps as enchantment. You step into the story chasing broomsticks and come out juggling institutional responsibility, labor ethics, and inherited prejudice. Some viewers reject the extra load and retreat into nostalgia. Others shoulder it and walk on, minds weighted but sharper. That bifurcation is the hidden climax. A children's film manufacturing mindful descent is rarer than any 3-headed dog. The sword, the sock, the diary, each prop's dress disguise as invitation. Choose which relic to carry forward, decide which curse you're willing to break, then look up from the fantasy and see how many pipes run under your own floor. Fame's a fickle friend, Harry, Lockhart preens early on, believing the line flatters his legend. By the time the credits roll, those 5 words ring like a subpoena for every institution, family, or fandom that ever traded integrity for applause. Take the sentence away from his smug grin, and it turns prophetic. Reputation can't be the bedrock of safety, because fame is only a light on the surface. Real protection comes from roots, choices, and the grit to expose rot in your own foundations. So here's the friction point the story leaves in your pocket on the way out. If Hogwarts had accepted the blood purity smear in the Daily Prophet and expelled Muggle-born students for their own security, would the Basilisk have run out of targets or simply gone hunting new ones? Flip the lens again. If Harry had refused the sword of Gryffindor and tried to reason with Riddle, arguing that shared orphanhood bonded them, would persuasion have cracked the diary's grip or gifted Voldemort a second life? Those sliding door scenarios aren't just fan hypotheticals. They force us to audit our real-world instincts about safety through exclusion and empathy toward extremists. Which risk feels heavier, fighting the serpent with steel or talking it down empty-handed? Easter egg hunters, you've earned one last breadcrumb. Freeze the dual club wide shot at frame 14,292, and you'll spot a crew member's sneaker behind a house banner, visible for half a second before Snape flings Draco's spell. The blooper survived Final Cut because the banner's green blended with set dressing. Nobody noticed until the 4K remaster. It's a fitting accident. Even in the tightest fantasy machine, ordinary souls step into frame, reminding us that art, like lineage, like prejudice, is made by people who leave footprints whether they mean to or not. A subplot trimmed after test screenings adds a sharper twist. In the deleted pages, nearly headless Nick urges Harry to petition the Hogwarts board to fund ghost counseling for trauma-stuck spirits. The scene was cut for pacing, but its ghost of an idea lingers. Healing isn't automatic. It demands political will. Suppose the board had approved Nick's plea. Would Myrtle still be sobbing in the pipes half a century later? The trim keeps the film's rhythm lean, yet the absence itself indicts how bureaucracies prefer monument repairs to emotional reparations. What other fixes did we, the audience, leave on the cutting room floor of our own civic timelines? We finish, as every good chamber does, with a door not quite shut. Lucius Malfoy stalks off unpunished. Dobby's sock sets one elf free, but leaves thousands cleaning silver. Phoenix feathers drift upward, but the basilisk's carcass still leaks venom into the floodwater. The camera turns away because a children's movie must exhale, yet the unresolved frames are the ones that lodge deepest. They ask a final favor. When the lights come up and the real corridors feel less enchanted, will we accept the neat victory or track the wet footprints that lead farther into the dark? Now it's your turn to swing the sword, or the pen, or the protest sign. Drop into the comments and answer with a single emoji. Which emotion sums up your state after revisiting this children's sequel that smuggles systemic dread under flying cars and laugh-track ghosts? Your glyph becomes another diary entry in the culture's living book, proof that every story keeps writing itself long after the last page is stabbed shut.